things to think about as we go forward is really, because we're exploring this archetype of the wild woman, I kind of have been thinking myself, and I want everyone to be thinking about the archetype of the wild woman today. Like what do we see as the state of this archetype in today's culture? I also want us to be thinking, in a sense, in terms of identity, because of course, one of the things that we're also seeing in the culture today is an identity obsession, in which identity becomes like a concept that we hold about ourselves. And I kind of want to, as we're going, differentiate that kind of conceptual identity from the like selfhood identity, from the identity that I have that is particular to my unique situation, my unique body, my unique family upbringing, my unique place in the culture, that sense of self that you have that comprises more of a holistic identity versus these like conceptual identity concepts that to me are more of like a shared identity. So those are kind of these like broad questions, thinking of our rational self also versus our creative self. This is a question to open up into, and also, I don't know, questioning also into our purpose, you know, like the purpose of our embodiment a little bit. So those are just things to think about as we go along. So I am very excited to have you here today, and I hope that everyone read the introductory chapter. If anyone hasn't read the introductory chapter, yay, I love it. I do have that chapter on my YouTube, so anyone who doesn't feel like reading it can listen along. It is unfortunately one of those books that the full book is not on Audible. So as I go forward in this series, what I'm always going to do is I'm always going to read the chapter, and that will be available. If anyone doesn't feel like purchasing the book, you can go along each week as I read each chapter for you. You can listen that way. So I'm gonna give some, in this lecture, I'm gonna ground us into the chapter. I'm going to talk about the perspective that the author is coming from. We're going to explore the terminology, and I'm going to kind of flow through my analysis. But I also want to start with a little bit about myself. So a lot of people who are listening in will know me from my activism and my online profile, being my known heretic YouTube, Twitter, Instagram profile. And I kind of like that because heretic has its roots in being a heretical thinker. And I like to make the distinction between being an apostate and being a heretic. So someone who is an apostate is simply a non-believer in the orthodoxy or religion of the day, whereas heretics are a little more active. Rather than just being a non-believer, they hold distinctly opposing views, and they usually are speakers of these views, so they speak blasphemy into the culture or into the community. And that's one of the reasons I like this word, and that kind of I don't know, it feels like it has typified in my life a lot of my thinking in general. My other background is in depth psychology, which is a very niche part of psychology. It is a post-Jungian and post-Freudian psychology, and both Jung and Freud are said to be fathers of the unconscious, in that they were both some of the first thinkers to grapple with those unconscious forces in the human psyche. So depth psychology kind of builds on their work and it studies the processes that take place outside of our conscious awareness. But this includes like collective aspects of the psyche, cultural aspects, as well as archetypal aspects. So this kind of goes into what we're talking about today, which is a little bit about archetype. And I'm going to close this curtain really quickly because I'm getting a glare. Better. So the other part of my background is the theater. So for me, the theater is an embodiment of text. So I've taught theater, I've been an actor, I've been a director, I've been a writer of theater, and I have always felt that theater is a great way to physically engage with ideas. And that kind of informs my approach as well. And then my last passion has been for the esoteric arts. So these are things like astrology and palmistry and the tarot. And these forms have always spoken to me largely because they also grapple with the archetypes, which to me is about tendencies and pattern recognition. And as we see in the title, this book is about archetypes. It's about the wild woman archetype in particular, but it's also about archetypes in general. So for those who don't know, archetypes are typically, when we speak about them, we're talking about the psychological patterns that we see in our lives and in our culture. So they're constantly being lived around us. These are the larger patterns. These are things like the maiden, the mother, the crone, the warrior, terms that we would say these are capitalized, not necessarily personalized. These are cultural phenomenon. And archetypes are different than stereotypes in that the archetype is holding the entire form. It's holding both the light and the shadow side of the image. So the archetype of the mother would be holding the notion of the good mother and the bad mother, or the archetype of the warrior, would be holding the archetype of the heroic warrior that goes off to war to protect his family and country, as well as the shadow of the archetype, which might be, the guy that is always getting into a bar brawl because he's hypersensitive. So that archetype holds all of those forms. And I really like this quote from Jung about archetypes. This is in his foreword of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And Jung says that the original structural components of the psyche are no less surprising a uniformity than those of the visible body. Archetypes are, so to speak, the organs of the pre-rational psyche. They are internally inherited forms and ideas which at first have no specific content. Their specific content only appears in the course of an individual's life when personal experience is taken up precisely in these forms. So I really liked what he was saying here, that the archetypes are the organs of the pre-rational psyche. And I like that in terms of how it speaks to me and embodiment, that these are the organs of the psyche. Just like the body has vital organs, and organs, of course, are these collections of tissues that structurally come together to do a particular function, a specialized function. And I think this is what the archetypes do. It's these patterns of psychic energy that come together to do a particular function. So Jung also held that archetypes are part of our collective unconscious. So archetypes are things that are cross-cultural and cross-time. And we can kind of see this if we go all the way back into the Greek theater and we look at, for example, Commedia dell'arte, and they are famous for their masks that they use, and the masks typify the different archetypes. So these are the iconic characters that often show up in Greek plays. So these are like the hero, the lover, the buffoon, the braggart, the doctor, who is like the expert. So all of these different forms, humans have really recognized and typified for a very long time. And archetypes can also be said to be a kind of gestalt. So gestalt is like an all at once, where the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And Gestalt psychology, which is a brand of psychology, they believe that the most fruitful way to view psychology is as organized, structured wholes. So a lot of the Gestalt therapists had kind of a critique of the behavioral therapists that would like sort of extract certain behavior and try to define certain behavior at a one at a time way. Like, you know, this might even be like a Pavlov's dog kind of a experiment where you're extracting like a particular behavior and doing experiments to understand it. But they would say that this kind of experiment, because it takes you out of the realm of your whole life, it's actually not very useful, or not as useful for understanding psychology or human psychology as a whole. So this book, of course, is about a specific archetype. It's about the wild woman archetype in all her various patterns and forms. And we'll kind of go into her particular meaning in a bit, but we can see from the book that this is a woman's instinctual self, her inner knowing, you know, her heart and her guts and her inner fire and her inner light, and the part of us that like sniffs things out and uncovers things in that way. This is a book that is for women. It's a book about women. It's about our lives and our stories and our ways and our patterns and the images that are in us and that reflect us. So the book, The Woman That Runs with the Wolves, it goes into these patterns and motifs, and it goes into the events that we experience and encounter in our lives. And these are the pivotal moments that take us deeper into ourselves. And hopefully by understanding them, they help us grow as women. So I wanted to start by, there is a quote in the book, Gynecology, the Meta-Ethics of Radical Feminism by Mary Daly. And regardless of whether you tend to agree with a radical feminist analysis or not, I think this quote is a really interesting one. Now here, Mary Daly is specifically talking about radical feminism, but I think we can draw more from it, and I think it relates to this book. So about radical feminism, Mary Daly says, it is affirming our original birth, our original source, movement, and surge of living. This finding of our original integrity is remembering ourselves. And she has this word, remembering, broken up into two: remembering. What she is saying in that, what she means is to literally remember our body, to put it back into our bodies, to put the organs of our body back together again. So to me, I feel like this quote from Mary Daly, it could be used as an introductory quote into this book about women who runs with the wolves, because this book is really also about that remembering, that finding of the original source. And to me, this is a reconnection with what woman is, with what female is, and with what feminine is, in the sense of the largest capacities of the feminine. So not the feminine in the stereotypical sense of what we mean when we say femininity. So not in the pink loving, makeup wearing, high heeled wearing, like femininity, but the feminine, which is our intuition, our source, our inner connection, our creativity, our inner lives, the values that have particularly to do with the feminine rather than the masculine. And I do think those values are very much ones of intuition and instinct. So really, Clarissa Pinkola Estes's book is also about this remembering. It's putting back together a women's history that has been lost. So I think it's really urgent work, of course, because so much of our history and our songs and our community and our women's circles and what used to be consciousness raising group, so much of this women's wisdom has been lost, or if not necessarily lost, certainly culturally devalued. So culturally right now, we're really facing the dismemberment of womanhood. We're being commodified, compartmentalized, sectionalized into our component parts. We are being called in the media and even in medical books at this point, we are being called by our parts and our functions. We're being called bleeders and breeders and vulva owners and cervix havers and chest feeders and birthing bodies. So we are grappling with the literal dismemberment of womanhood right now. So this book being a journey down the path of remembering and re-embodying those images and ideas that we've lost, I think is really interesting. It's really an interesting thing to do right now. And I think it's a very valuable thing to do, because we are revaluing these lost values by going down this path. So Clarissa Pinkola Estes has termed these particular themes the archetype of the wild woman. And Clarissa Pinkola Estes herself is coming from a background as a Jungian analyst. So archetypes are very important to her and to her work with this background. These, of course, are as we said earlier, the collective patterns, the collective images, the motifs that apply universally across time and culture. And we use them to talk about the patterns of human psyche. But sometimes, as we see, these patterns fall into and out of the collective unconscious. And I think there's a really interesting observation made by Jung, and this is in his book, Civilization in Transition. So he's also kind of talking about what happens exactly like this, like what happens when an archetype falls out of the collective consciousness. So he says, archetypes are like riverbeds, which dry up when the water deserts them, but which it can find again at any time. An archetype is like an old watercourse along which the water of life has flowed for centuries, digging a deep channel for itself. The longer it has flowed in this channel, the more likely it is that sooner or later the water will return to its old bed. So I really like that notion because it says that even if we have, devalued something, even if we have lost it or let it fall out of the collective consciousness, it's still there. It's still existing. And as soon as we give it energy or attention, that water will begin to flow again. So really much of this book, and Clarissa Pinkola Estes talks about this, much of this book is a restoration project. So she is really trying to do that work of restoring and reclaiming that which has been lost, of opening this channel again and helping the water to flow. So she's restoring the wild woman archetype to its rightful place in women's lives. I also want to point to another book, which is this one, which is called Pagan Grace, by Jeanette Paris. And here, what Jeanette Paris is doing, she is another archetypal psychologist. She deals with, she likes to talk about myth and goddesses, and she uses these myths to uncover values and archetypes, which is very similar to what Clarissa Pinkola Estes does. And in this book, she has a critique of clinical psychology. So she's kind of comparing archetypal psychology to clinical psychology. And she's saying that clinical psychology is the kind of psychology that names everything a disorder to be solved with clinical cocktails, or sorry, with chemical cocktails rather. And to me, obviously, this is very relevant to our times where we are solving, the psychological problems of children and non-conforming people with a very clinical approach, which thinks that everything is a problem to be solved with chemicals, drugs, surgery, rather than looking at what's happening underneath. And she says of this kind of scientific psychology, clinical psychology, that it is precisely the use of an abstract and falsely precise vocabulary in scientific psychology that convinces me that we will gain only by looking once again at the founding images, the ones behind the concepts that we use to understand ourselves. Archetypal psychology sees itself as the antidote to a psychology that asks us to be everything all at once, to be without psychological flaws, to be without symptoms. The archetypes offer us a way to be both perfect and incomplete, divine and demonic, both crazy and wise, like the unconscious. So I really like what is being explored here because, again, to me, this fits exactly into our cultural construct that we're currently seeing, where everyone is being forced to come to understand themselves as a conceptual identity, and that if you take this path of medicalization or extreme plastic surgery, that you will become a person who is no longer experiencing symptoms. So we're looking at the symptoms as things to be solved, rather than looking at the symptoms as reflecting back on a cultural problem and issue. People are having these symptoms because they're reacting to a narrow, regressive cultural construct. Their symptoms are essentially a fever in response to an infection, where the fever actually, if they're listened to, the fever can be a healthy response to the infection. The infection is the thing that's the real issue. And she's saying that archetypal psychology, because it has a more holistic view, allows us to be in a place where we can be perfect and incomplete, where we can sort of say yes to these symptoms that we are experiencing, and then basically get to the root of them and understand them, and allow ourselves to witness, like, these are making me crazy, this culture is making me crazy, but we get wise to it. So this book, of course, is about the wild woman archetype. So when I read from Clarissa's book, I'll say the page numbers. Now, this is I have the hard copy version, so I don't know if my pages will be 100% accurate, but even so, it will give you some idea of where we are. So I want to kind of start going to Clarissa in her own words. So this book is about the wild woman, and on page 12, she kind of takes us through it. And she says, first of all, I love this, what she says about women and wolves. So she says, a healthy woman is much like a wolf, robust, chock full, strong, life force, life-giving, territorially aware, inventive, loyal, roving. And then separation from the wildest nature causes a woman's personality to become meager, thin, ghostly, spectral. So I love this connection that she's making between the woman and the wolf. And of course, this is a theme that flows throughout, but it's really like this instinctual self, this intuitive self, this instinctual self. So I like how she goes into this, that when wild woman is our ally, we see not through two eyes, but through the eyes of the intuition, which is many-eyed. When we assert our intuition, we are therefore like the starry night. We gaze through the world with 1,000 eyes. And I really like, so further down, I really like this too, because I think that culturally that word wild, we hear it in things like girls gone wild, like somehow being wild is being reckless. It's just like, it's either, drinking too much and like flashing your boobs, or maybe we see wild as like living outside of culture, living in a wild way. Like we have all these survival shows right now. So I think that word wild really gets used in ways that mean kind of reckless or outside of culture. So I like what she says here. So she says, to adjoin to the instinctual nature does not mean to come undone, to move from east to west, to act crazy or out of control. It does not mean to lose one's primary socializations or become less human. In fact, it means quite the opposite. The wild nature has a vast integrity to it. It means to establish territory, to find one's pack, to be in one's body with certainty and pride, regardless of the gifts of the body's gifts and limitations, to speak and act in one's behalf, to be aware, alert, to draw on the innate feminine powers of intuition and sensing, to come into one's cycles and to find what one belongs to rise with dignity and to retain as much consciousness as possible. So I really think this distinction is very important, because it's really underlining the fact that this wild woman archetype, which is this intuitive connection with the self, this is grounding. It has an internal integrity to it. It means to find one's territory. So to me, this is a very grounding principle, to be in one's body, regardless of your body's gifts and limitations. And in a culture which is constantly giving us opportunities to dissociate, this is a very different approach. Our culture, when we feel uncomfortable or afraid or out of control or depressed, or you name it, almost emotion, this culture is preaching like, just zone out on a Netflix or get on social media or have a drink or get high, or there's a million ways that we are offered to dissociate from our emotions, to get out of our heads and out of our bodies, really, too. So I like this idea of this instinctual self, this wild self, as being this grounding principle. And it goes back into, again, this quality of remembering and putting back into the body and following the wisdom of the body for all of our sensations, both emotional and physical. So, okay, so then I really like this on page 6. She goes into the fact that okay, so I'm just going to read it. So she says, a woman's issues of soul cannot be treated by carving her into a more acceptable form as defined by an unconscious culture, nor can she be bent into a more intellectually acceptable shape by those who claim to be the soul bearers of consciousness. And I think this is what happens all the time. This is, first of all, I think why we see young girls carving up their bodies to fit themselves into a particular way of culture, whether they are carving up their bodies by getting double mastectomies and using breast binders, or whether they are carving up their bodies by anorexia and other disorders. And I think that it is true that in cultural history, and it's still true today, like we have men defining for us what a woman is, but this has been true throughout human history. And so I went back all the way to Aristotle, who grounded us in this. He is saying that he says that to be a female, as it were, is to be a mutilated male, and we must look upon the female character as being sort of a natural deficiency. I also pulled, so this book is Susan Griffin, Women in Nature. This book is almost entirely, it's sort of it could be a great companion book to The Women Who Run with the Wolves, because it's also looking at how women are viewed as pieces of nature by men and culture. So women are treated the same way that nature is treated, in that women are seen to be conquered, dominated, controlled, and not allowed basically this wildish nature. But she uses a lot of found quotes from text throughout history. And this one just really, this is a one from Henry Miller. And it just really reminds me, because I remember, for example, in high school, reading men like Henry Miller and D.H. Lawrence and Burroughs and Kerouac, and being like, oh, like, these poets, these expatriates, these beautiful writers, and not realizing that I'm just like frigging assimilating all of their views about what it means to be a woman. And this one is really telling. This is very disturbing and telling. It's from Tropic of Cancer. And he says, when you look at women with their clothes on, you imagine all sorts of things. You give them an individuality, which they haven't got, of course. There's just a crack between the legs. It's all an illusion. All that mystery about sex, and you discover it's nothing at all, just a blank. There's nothing there, nothing at all. And we see women throughout history have also, critiqued this. And one of my favorite little critiques about this kind of thinking is in Jane Eyre. I'm sorry, not Jane Eyre, Jane Austen. Jane Austen. This is a quote from Persuasion. And there's a man speaking, and he's saying, the man is explaining to Anne, I forget what the man character's name is right now, but he's explaining to Anne the problem with women. And he's saying, well, I don't think I've ever opened a book in my life which had not something to say upon women's inconsistency, songs and proverbs, and all the talk of women's fickleness. But perhaps you will say they are written by men. And Anne says, yes, perhaps I shall. She says, if you please, no reference to examples in books. Men have every advantage in telling us their own story. Education has been theirs in a much higher degree. The pen has been in their hands, and I will not allow books to prove anything. So clearly this is like, women throughout history have confronted this. And it's very upsetting because of course, we are still confronting it today. We are being told to redefine what a woman is, to redefine what a mother is, to use their new terms to talk about our own lives and our own selves. And those of us who want to continue to talk about the embodied nature of our being, we're once again being told we don't get to define ourselves. We don't get to talk about ourselves. We have to wait until a man gives us permission, or else we're hateful and bigots and a turf. So there's a quote on 10, because I think this book is very much about, as I said, refinding, refortifying, reforging. So on 10, and I think I actually said this, this might be a repeat, because I think I did just say this. Wait, where's my page numbers? Oh, okay, yes. So this I haven't said this yet. Okay, so she's talking about it's always there. So she's saying when we lose touch with the instinctual psyche, we live in a semi-destroyed state, and images and powers that are natural to the feminine are not allowed full development. So when a woman is cut away from her basic source, she is sanitized, and her instincts and natural life cycles are cut off. They're subsumed by the culture, or by the intellect, or by one's ego, either one's own or those belonging to others. And I do think many women have allowed this to happen, that someone else's ego and intellect, they are allowing themselves to be subsumed. But she offers us hope, because she says, fortunately, no matter how many times she is pushed down, she bounds back up again. No matter how many times she is forbidden, quelled, cut back, diluted, tortured, touted as unsafe, dangerous, mad, or other derogations, like turf probably, she emanates upward in women, so that even the most quiet, even the most restrained woman keeps a secret place for the wild woman. Even the most repressed woman has a secret life with secret thoughts and secret feelings, which are lush and wild, that is to say, natural. Even the most captured woman guards the place of the wildish self, for she knows intuitively that someday there will be a loophole, an aperture, a chance, and she will hightail it to escape. So I really like that. And I also like it in terms of, that this is that going back to that beginning quote of Jung's, that these riverbeds, even though they may seem empty, they are still there, available, and holding the shape for the water to flow through them again. And I think also, I mean, there to me, there's also this nice connection with the wolf, just in how wolves are, were basically hunted from Yellowstone. But then when they come back into the environment, you see other things come back. You see, you see the fish come back. You see, the rivers come back. You see the other populations begin to swell. So there's always this wildish nature which wishes to thrive. And she notes that women and wolves are both hounded and harassed, falsely impugned to be devouring and devious and over aggressive. And again, like, this to me is very It's very much a part of the culture today that the women who are speaking out against this dismemberment and disembodiment of us and this redefinition of us, the same thing is we're hounded and harassed and abused and called names and accused of being, vicious and other than what we actually are. So the other thing that I want to underline as we're going through the chapter now is the use here. She talks about it in this chapter, but the whole book is really about this, and it's about the use of fairy tales and stories to mark these different themes. Now, those of you who kind of follow my work, I do use fairy tales a lot in my own work because of their resonance and their ability to speak to universal lessons. So like I very much also, I love that Red Riding Hood story because it is about not trusting the charming stranger and about listening to your instincts. And the images are fantastical, are a little bit fantastical, but they are very clear. They are very useful. And in this great book called Uses of Enchantment, Erin, I know you know this book, by Bruno Bettelheim, he says about fairy tales that they are applying the psychoanalytic model, by applying the psychoanalytic model of the human personality. Fairy tales carry important messages to the conscious, the pre-conscious, and the unconscious mind on whatever level each is functioning at the time. By dealing with the universal human problems, these stories encourage development while at the same time reliving pre-conscious and unconscious pressures. As the stories unfold, they give conscious credence to the body and to the internal pressures, and they show the way to satisfy these that are in line with self-development requirements. And I like that he's saying that they work stories and myths and fairy tales work on these different levels. Obviously, we understand the plot in a conscious way, but also these images, the things that are fantastical in them are working with us on an unconscious level. And that is the great thing about stories and fairy tales and myths, is that they affect us on the level of their images. So, we read them in a linear, one at a time plotting fashion, but the images have their own kind of gestalt that will, pierce through our consciousness, and we will receive them on that level of the mammalian or animal brain. So I kind of want to talk just like a tiny bit briefly about that, because this book is about intuition and instinct versus conceptualization a little bit. I think it's cool to differentiate that. So the oldest part of our brain, the basal ganglia part of the brain that's way back in the brainstem, that is the brain of pure instinct and responsiveness. That is the brain that processes our sensations. That is the part of the brain that when we touch a hot pan, it pulls back. That is the part of the brain that, tells us it's time to eat, that desires to have sex and procreate. That is the instinctual brain. The mammalian part of the brain, which is kind of that main part of our cortex, that is the next oldest. That's still quite an old part of the brain. And that is the part of the brain that deals in pattern recognition. So that is the part of the brain that recognizes faces, facial cues. That is the intuitive brain. So looking at patterns that maybe your conscious brain or not conscious, your conceptualizing brain rather, hasn't put together all the clues, but that mammalian part of the brain is putting the patterns together and sending you these little nudges. It's not the part of the brain that deals in language. It's the intuitive, I would say, part of the brain. And then that prefrontal cortex, which evolutionarily is the newest part of the brain, that is the part of the brain that deals in our conceptualizing functions, in our rationalizing processes. That is the part of the brain that understands language and alphabetic language systems, like taking an abstract letter, making it into a word, and then putting all of those words together in a sentence to make an entire concept all together. So that part of the brain, I will also say, is the slowest part of the brain, because the conceptualizing function of the brain takes place over time, whereas the other parts of the brain are more synthesizing and all at once. You know, when I don't have to, when I put my hand on a hot pan, I don't have to think about what to do. My body responds. You know, if you know, I don't know, if if a rabbit sees a wolf, you know, it doesn't wait around to think about whether this is a nice wolf or whether the wolf won't like her or not. If she says, you know, the rabbit runs, you know, the rabbit responds to instinct, hopefully. So this is one kind of separating these different parts of the brain, but looking at them for their use value. And we have definitely in this culture over privileged those rationalizing processes. Not that they aren't very important. I mean, they're important for what we're doing right now. We couldn't have this conversation without that function, but we've overvalued it, and often at the expense of our other capacities, those inner capacities. And in another great book, this book is pretty much all about what I just said. So this book by Leonard Shlain, which is called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, the conflict between word and image, he looks at this. So he highlights the different areas of the brain that are active in image versus alphabetic perception. So in image-based perception, which is the part of our perceptual awareness that we're using when we're hearing a story and there's a big bad wolf and a little girl in a red hood, and these images are working on us, we use, this is the type of perception that we use to view and respond to the concrete sensual world of nature and human artifacts. So he says of this perceptual level awareness, Shlain says, the brain simultaneously perceives all parts of the whole, and it integrates those parts synthetically into a gestalt, an all at once matter. So the traits that we need for this type of perception are simultaneity, wholeness, synthesis, and these are part of that like mammalian level brain. This is a pattern recognition. So this is how fairy tales and stories work on us, because we are gathering these images, and we synthesize these images through their sensual nature, through their kind of fantastical nature. Our brain takes in these images. So this mode of perception, he says, is receptive and affects the whole body. Consciousness idles and a person slides into an integrated mental state of being. So this again is why I think that looking at using story and using myth and using fairy tale are an interesting way to explore these ideas, because simply by doing the work of exploring these more image-based, exploring ideas in an image-based way, it literally puts us into the state of being that Clarissa Pinkola Estes is talking about. So by doing the work, it puts you into the intuitive, receptive state of being. So it's very cool. I mean, that's what I think is so cool about this work, because by participating with it, you are actually practicing it. And that is really cool. Joseph Campbell, in The Power of Myth, he says mythology is not a lie. Mythology is poetry. Mythology is metaphorical. It has been well said that mythology is the penultimate truth, because the ultimate truth cannot be put into words. It is beyond words, beyond images, beyond that bounding rim of the Buddhist wheel of becoming. I really love that. And I love that he says it is not a lie. I think that is because, I think that a lot of times we look at the fairy tale and the myth as fantastical, and that they're not exactly lying, but also not exactly the truth. And I heard this one woman say on a she was on the doesn't matter. It was on NPR. Good. I was almost going to get lost in that detail. So she was on NPR, and she was telling a story about, she was a Hawaiian woman. She was telling a story about the first peoples of Hawaii. And the interviewer was being kind of snarky. And he says to her, so you're telling me you really believe this? You really think, you think this really happened? And I thought her answer was really perfect, because she just said back to him in this really calm way, well, I don't know whether it happened or not, but you can see for yourself that it's true. And I think, it just struck me. It was so clear when she said it. And I think that is the power of these myths and these fairy tales, because it's not about whether they happened or not. You can see the truth in them. The truth is in the metaphor. They hold the universal truths. And the thing is that these metaphors reach us below the level of our conscious willing. They hit us at that pre-conscious level. And Clarissa herself speaks to this. So she tells us why she uses story, and she talks about this on page 16. So she says, stories are embedded with instructions which guide us about the complexities of life. Stories enable us to understand the need for and the ways to raise a submerged archetype. The stories on the following pages are the ones out of hundreds that I've studied for decades that most clearly express the bounty of the wild woman archetype. So I really like this, because this again, it goes way back to that quote that I said earlier by Jung in the beginning about these abandoned archetypes being like a dry riverbed, but they're waiting to be filled. So she's saying that these stories, these are the way to find these lost archetypes. And I think this is important to say at this time, because she is coming from a perspective of a Jungian psychoanalyst. That is her background, but she also makes this distinction, and this is on page 19. And I think she comes herself. I don't think I said this in my very beginning, but she besides her besides her PhD, besides all of her academia, she was raised in an area of Appalachia in a town of about 600 people. So she comes from this place that was there was not a lot of literacy where she grew up with, and the oral tradition was very strong and very present. So she has that background in this small part of Appalachia, and she also, the other part of her family, and I think that family is Hungarian, and the other part of her family they are from Mexico, and also this had a very strong oral tradition. So she says that story is far older the art and science. It's far older than the art and science of psychology. It will always be the elder in the equation, no matter how much time passes. One of the oldest ways of telling, which intrigues me greatly, is the passionate trance, wherein the teller senses the audience, be it an audience of one or many, and that he or she enters a state of the world between worlds where the story is attracted to the trance teller and told through her. The storyteller is furthering soul making. So to me, this is saying, one, we have always used story as a way of understanding human psychology. And two, that the story, it's both our link to the past, it's part of our oral tradition, but it's a way of furthering the future, a way of future telling about how we can be as well as how we are. The other thing that I think is really important here, and how she talks about things specifically, and I really noticed this when I read the chapter aloud. I don't know if anyone, I don't know if you guys read it or if you listened, but I did put it up so people could listen to it, because the whole book isn't available on Audible. So I was just like, well, I'll just read it and people can listen for free. So it doesn't make you buy the book. But what I noticed when I read it is it has such a cadence to it. She has a real cadence with how she says things. So there's this real rhythm and flow of how it goes. And in, where did I put it? In The Poetics of Space by Bachelard, which he's just a great, interesting philosopher. He's a little texty, but also really beautiful. And he talks about the essence. He says that the essence of life is a feeling of being. Sorry, I'm getting it wrong. He says that the essence of life is not a feeling of being, but a feeling of participation. So it's a participation, it's a flowing onward, and that this flowing onward is necessarily expressed in terms of time and secondarily expressed in terms of space. And he calls this an auditive metaphor. So something we hear, a retineer, because in sound, in how we hear things, both time and space are epitomized. So if, having fixed the original in our mind's eye, we ask us how that form comes alive and fills with life, we discover a new and dynamic, vital category, a new property of the universe, which is reverberation. And I think this is very key to how Clarissa Pinkola Estes is telling us her stories, because it's all about oral tradition. There is a reverberation in how the cadence of her words are working on us. And again, the reading of this book is a participation in the exact philosophies that she's talking about. So participating with the book is a way of getting in touch with these intuitive ways of being. But I think, so I just picked out this little part in 13, and this is when she's like exploring the words that have to do with the archetype, and we can hear the cadence and rhythm of what she's saying. So what is the wild woman? She is all that is of instinct, of worlds both seen and hidden. She is the basis. We each receive her from a glowing cell which contains all the instincts and knowings needed for our lives. She is the life death, life force. She is the incubator. She is intuition. She is far seer. She is deep listener. She is loyal heart. She encourages humans to remain multilingual, fluent in the language of dreams, passion, and poetry. She whispers from night dreams. She leaves behind on the terrain of a woman's soul a coarse hair and muddy footprints. These fill women with longings to find her, free her, and love her. She is ideas, feelings, urges, and memory. She has been lost and half forgotten for a long, long time. She is the source, the light, the night, the dark, and the daybreak. She is the smell of good mud and the back leg of the fox. She is the birds which tell us secrets belong to her. She is the voice that says, this way, this way. And so much of her book is written in this kind of style that just pulls you. And I think, you know, Bachelard says it really well. It's this retenir, it's this reverberation. These words are sounding in you so that you in yourself are reverberating with them. You know, you not only hear them, but you are feeling their vibration within you. And I think that is a really cool quality and capacity of what she is, not just what she is talking about, but how she is bringing you into a participation with what she is talking about. She's making you sense it with your own body. And I want to also say as well, because this book is about intuition, and I think that intuition is so important, not just as a way to be in touch with ourselves and our own inner voice and our own inner life, but also just as a literal safeguarding tool. You know, Gavin de Becker, and I think, I don't know, I have spoken about him before in some of my in my YouTubes, but he is one of the foremost experts on safeguarding. And he talks about the intuition. So he is telling, I mean, he like works with the FBI, he protects Congress members, he's worked with members of the CIA. You know, he wrote this like mosaic model of how to like profile people for the FBI. So he is like, he's, you know, an expert on these things. You know, he's guarded presidents before. And he is talking about the intuition, which I think, you know, it's such a devalued thing in this culture. And so I think it's so important to remember it. But it's just a literal safeguarding tool. And he says of the intuition that intuition connects us to the natural world and to nature, freed from the bonds of judgment, married only to perception. It carries us to predictions we will later marvel at. And I really like that, because what this culture of conceptualizing identities wants us to do is it wants us to be in our judgment brain. So if I have a man who walks into my space, you know, I'm supposed to start conceptualizing. Why is he in my space? What am I meant to think about him? What am I meant to think about his identity? I don't know how he self-conceptualizes himself. So this is what Gavin is saying of judgment. Judgment is really slow. Judgment is really plotting, whereas intuition, when it's freed from judgment, simply responds, just like the rabbit responds to seeing the wolf by running the hell away. You know, the rabbit doesn't sit around being like, well, maybe the wolf just wants to have it, maybe he just has to pee, maybe he just, I don't know why the wolf is here. You know, that the rabbit doesn't sit around conceptualizing, it responds. And I also like that he says it carries us to predictions that we will later marvel at. So that is why, we talk about that mammalian part of the brain. That is the pattern recognition part of the brain. That is the part of the brain that is at work when you are saying, yeah, like, I didn't get a good feeling about that guy, but why didn't I get a good feeling about him? Well, yeah, you know why? Because I noticed that he was riding his bike. He was on the sidewalk. He wasn't passing me. Like I didn't know why I got a bad feeling. Now, if I go backwards in time, my conceptualizing function, that judgment part of me, can put all the little things together that are like, oh, that's why I am not, I can make this analysis. But that part of the brain that is pre-language, that is just doing pattern recognition, it sees all the things, and it just gives you the bad feeling because it wants you to respond to it. It's not trying to waste your time with these judgments. So this is just to say there are many reasons to value our intuition as a capacity that we can use and tap into. So I love, okay, so she talks also about these symptoms. So this is like where she's like doing this part of the book that is like, is this right for you? Because she goes into these symptoms. And I love these symptoms because I think, to me, these are the symptoms that we are all experiencing. And this is on page 11. And she says that using women's language exclusively, these symptoms of having lost touch with the wild woman are feeling extraordinarily dry, fatigued, frail, halt, or weak, depressed, confused, gagged, muzzled, unaroused, without inspiration, without animation, without soulfulness, without meaning, shame-bearing, chronic fuming, volatile, stuck, uncreative, feeling powerless, chronically doubtful, shaky, blocked, unable to follow through, giving one's creative life over to others, life-sapping choice in mates, work, or friendships, suffering to live outside of one's cycles, overprotective of self, inert, uncertain, faltering, inability to pace oneself or one's limits, not insistent on one's own tempo, to be self-conscious, to be away from one's god or gods, to be separated from one's revivification, drawn into domesticity, intellectualism, work, or inertia, because that is the safest place for one who has lost her instincts. So I see this as being very true because when we've lost our instincts, we fall into like workaholism, or we fall into caretaking for others, or we fall into other people's projects or other people's needs, or even just like I see some of these liberal feminists, like they fall into the party line, like repeating the party line and what other people say, because you have to do that if that's what you've lost touch of yourself, because ultimately we're all seeking grounding. So if we can't find it in ourselves, we have to seek it externally. And there's another, so a last sort of like external view. So Hillman, he's actually one of the fathers of depth psychology, and he has this little book. I love this little book. I've like marked all over. I just love this. This is like one of my faves. But he talks about this quality of notitia. And I think this is sort of the quality that we bring to participate with this book, with a book like Women Who Running with Wolves. And he talks about notitia as being a primary activity of the soul. And it's using really the imagination as a way of developing relationship with a thing. So he's saying that our imagination for creativity isn't special or rare or a unique gift like reserved for artists or geniuses, but an innate instinct and part of our psychology and part of our soulfulness. And I think this is another, like, we could probably do a whole thing on that alone, how the imagination is also a devalued capacity. But when we're participating with a book that is about story and myth, we're bringing our own imaginative capacity, and that capacity, as he says, and I agree with, is relationship building. So we're building a relationship with the material, we're building a relationship with ourself. We are building that. And okay, so I have two last quotes by Clarissa, and then I want to open it up for our discussion. So yeah, that's right. So I want to read on page 19. I really also think of this as as a lineage and a birthright. Like, there's something really special in it. I mean, maybe you could call it woo, but I don't think it's woo. I think it's just practical that as women, we have a relationship, mother to daughter to mother to daughter to mother to daughter, all the way back somewhere to that very first woman, and this is very special. This is very special and very rare. So Clarissa is here talking about a dream of hers. Now, dreams are very important to her as a Jungian analyst, and she says, I once dreamt I was telling stories and I felt someone patting my foot in encouragement. I looked down and saw that I was standing on the shoulders of an old woman who was steadying my ankles and smiling up at me. And I said to her, no, no, come stand on my shoulders, for you are old and I am young. No, no, she insisted. This is the way it is supposed to be. And I saw that she stood on the shoulders of a woman far older than she, who stood on the shoulders of a woman even older, who stood on the shoulder of a woman in robes, who stood on the shoulders of another soul, who stood on the shoulders. And I believed the old dream woman about the way it was supposed to be. The nurture for telling stories comes from those who have gone before. Telling or hearing stories draws its power from a towering column of humanity joined from one to another across time and space, elaborately dressed in the rags or robes or nakedness of their time, and filled to the bursting with life still being lived. If there is a single source of story and the noumen of story, this long chain of humans is it. And I like this here. And it goes back to this point of stories being both like the past and a grounding in what's come before, and a future telling, a future stories. Really, in a sense, all stories have a little bit of sci-fi in them, in that they are giving us an opportunity to participate differently with our future. They are giving us a guide of how to go forward. They're grounding us in the path, but showing us a way to move forward. And then finally, I like what she says about who this book is for. So she says, this is a book of women's stories held out as markers along the path. They are for you to read, contemplate, and follow toward your own natural one freedom, your caring self, animals, earth, children, sisters, lovers, and men. And I'll tell you right now, the doors to the world of wild woman are few but precious. If you have a deep scar, that is a door. If you have an old story, that is a door. If you love the sky and the water so much that you almost cannot bear it, that is a door. If you yearn for a deeper life, a full life, a sane life, that is a door. The material in this book was chosen to embolden you. The work is offered as a fortification for those on their way, including those who toil in difficult inner landscapes, as well as those who toil in and for the world. We must strive to allow our souls to grow in their natural ways and to their natural depths. The wildest nature does not require a woman to be a certain color, a certain education, a certain lifestyle, or certain economic class. In fact, it cannot thrive in an atmosphere of enforced political correctness or by being bent into old, burnt out paradigms. It thrives on fresh sight and self integrity. It thrives in its own nature. So whether or not you are an introvert or extrovert, a woman-loving woman, a man-loving woman, a God-loving woman, or all of the above, whether you are possessed of a simple heart or the ambitions of an Amazon, whether you are trying to make it to the top or just make it through to tomorrow, whether you be spicy or somber, regal or roughshed, the wild woman belongs to you. She belongs to all women. And I really I love her writing so much, but I just love her so much. And I love this part too about, like, if you have a scar, if you have an old story, if you have a love, this is for you. And I think of this in terms of like my activism as well. Like, I'm here, I'm doing this work because of my traumas, because of my wounds, because these are the things that trigger me to do this work. This work hits my particular wounds, so I get activated by it and I'm drawn to it. And I think, this is true here. Like, if you have a scar, this work is for you. Like these parts of us that where we're wounded, they are calling to us and drawing us on this path and into this work. And I just really, I love this book. I love this book when I found it in college, and in rereading it, I've just been totally revitalized into just seeing that this time that we're all living through right now is absolutely this book is needed for this time, because we don't have a lot of people who are valuing the values that we want to see into the world. Like I do want to be doing this activism that I do. I think the activism is very important. I think it's important to fight this fight, but I also think that we cannot fight this fight and not offer anything. So I want to offer the values that are the antithesis, to the values of dissociation and compartmentalization and commodification and objectification, and cognitive dissonance. I want to offer these values of intuition and instinct and embodiedness and internal integrity, and relationship and intimacy and imagination and creativity. These are the values that are the antithesis. These are the values that give us internal integrity rather than external validation seeking for a conceptualized identity. So I think that this is why this is so urgent to me. And I think that even though this book is written in the 90s, it's really fresh for what we're doing today.